Chapter 1. March 1799. She made her way down the darkened alley between buildings that were constructed in such a way that the brilliant moonbeams did not stand a chance of illuminating it. Her face, laden with oversized spectacles distorting her vision and suffering from a mild case of night blindness, she did her best to steer clear of the multitude of hazardous obstacles cluttering the taxing and never-ending journey to her destination. Elizabeth wished she dared remove the cumbersome wire-rimmed spectacles assaulting the bridge of her delicate nose and prominent cheekbones. Finding her way through the poorly lit streets in the dark haze of pre-dawn London was difficult enough without being encumbered by blurred vision. They were not even her glasses. Her vision was perfect. She secretly snatched them from the estate overseer's desk just before departing to help with her disguise. Since the spindly old man kept a variety of vision assistants, from wire-rimmed glasses to magnifying lenses, she doubted he would miss them. The frame of the pair she hastily selected transformed her striking aristocratic beauty into what could only be described as common and mousy. With the hood of her unlined, coarsely woven grey woolen cloak pulled low about her oval face and the oversized glasses, there was little left exposed. She felt confident she would attract minimal attention from any curious onlookers she may encounter at this hour. Elizabeth pulled her cloak tighter around her slender body, ignoring its rough assault on her tender flesh. Although the prickly fabric was not something she was accustomed to, she preferred enduring its rough touch to the bitter wind whipping through the abandoned alley. It felt abnormally cold for this time of year. Or maybe it was not the weather. Maybe the weather was normal and she was colder than usual for another reason. Could it be from her fear of being discovered before she was able to carry out her plans, or possibly her anticipation of what was to come? Her pale yellow slippers, adorned with rows of multicoloured beading blended to create a beautiful peacock, provided a flimsy walk. Their delicate constitution was certainly no match for the thick muck coating the final stretch of the dark, dank alley. Elizabeth heaved a sigh. She had almost manoeuvred her way through the perilous debris permeating her path without a mishap. She was so near. Now she would be presented to the good Dr. Jameson with the all too questionable and unpleasantly thick goo coating a great deal of her slippers. She should have taken the time to steal a more serviceable pair of shoes from one of the servants. When secretly preparing her costume for her big escape, she completely forgot about her footwear. Not only were her slippers not serviceable, they were far too fashionable in comparison to the rest of her attire. Elizabeth shook her head. She was reduced to stealing. She hated thieves. It was a thief who caused the death of her mother and father. Her 8th birthday had barely passed when the courier arrived with the horrific news that her parents were killed during a robbery while en route to court. 9 years later, Elizabeth still recalled that fateful morning as if it were only yesterday. The soft orange glow of the rising sun was just climbing up from behind the tips of the tree-lined hillside, and silken droplets of morning dew blanketed the estate's garden when the courier's horse pranced into their courtyard. Only a few of the servants were up and about. The absence of activity accentuated the loud echo of his lathered horse's hooves on the cobblestone. Already awake, she clearly heard the courier's heavy pounding against the solid oak entry door directly below her open window. The messenger had foregone using the wrought-iron eagle's head door-knocker, not trusting it to be loud enough to alert the residents of his presence at such an early hour. Her room was positioned in the centre of the second floor, directly above the great hall. Although she could easily hear the muffled chaos the news caused, she was unable to make out the actual words being spoken. She assumed the sense of dread she felt was over leaving the warmth of her cosy bed before the revival of a fire in the hearth could transform the cold stone floors and horsehair plastered walls into the welcoming haven she knew and loved. She sunk deeper beneath the folds of her thick coverings and watched the mist from her breath dissipate into the air like little puff clouds. It would not be long before someone would be in to stoke up the fireplace, and she could inquire about the courier's disrupting visit. He was probably sent by a neighbouring lord or lady in need of her father's ministering, not realising her parents were on their way to court. When the door opened, it was not a servant with a bucket of hot coals for her fire who entered. It was her governess, Isabel. Her reluctance was apparent as she shared the shocking news that would change Elizabeth's life forever. Elizabeth's family spent her early years living blissfully in the country, with her father travelling back and forth to court as summoned. Both he and her mother loved the peaceful beauty of country living. But when King George's health noticeably started to fail, it was her father's duty as the senior royal physician to be available at all times, something that could not be accomplished unless they took up residence in the king's court. Elizabeth had developed a nasty head cold after disobediently playing in the light rain of an evening and chilling her body to the bone. Her brother Harold caught it from Elizabeth almost immediately. Aware the king would frown upon the family arriving at court with 2 sick children, but unable to delay their trip long enough to allow the children to recover their health, her parents reluctantly left their little darlings with the care of Isabel. The children were to join their parents as soon as they were healthy enough to be presented at court. That never happened. Instead, they were whisked off to London to live with their mother's brother, Lord Cyrus Roberts. A childless widow with minimal inclination toward warmth and expression where Elizabeth was concerned, Lord Roberts provided her with her basic needs, minus affection and love. Elizabeth looked at the starless sky. The only hint of illumination came from the tiny sliver of the moon as it prepared to change places with the rising sun. Soot and smoke shot relentlessly from London's multitude of chimneys of all shapes and sizes as they were fired up in preparation for the day's cooking. She wished it was easier to see her surroundings. She would have at least liked to know more about the goo that clung to her appendages before she continued on. Better yet, she would have liked to find a means of cleaning it off. She was so busy musing about the goo on her feet, she didn't realise she reached her destination until the alley was at a sudden end. Looking as far into her surrounds as she could, she slipped from the alley and made her way up the front steps of a large red brick townhouse. Lifting the ornate, solid brass knocker from the thick walnut door was no easy feat. She used both hands to wrestle the heavy, formidable-looking lion's head far enough away from its cradle to produce an adequate sound when she released it. When a small aperture in the door, no more than 6 inches wide and 2 inches high, slid open within seconds after dropping the brass knocker, she found herself staring into squinting, bloodshot eyes that hinted of the blue lustre of a youth gone by. "Declare yourself," bellowed a strong, steady voice. "'Tis Lady Elizabeth Nottingham, sir. I come to see Dr. Jameson," she replied far more confidently than she felt. His gruff tone did nothing to soothe her already frazzled nerves. The silence seemed deafening while she waited for what seemed like an eternity for the heavy door to slowly pull open. "He is running behind, miss. I shall show you where to wait. Pray follow me and do not dawdle," the steward stated in an authoritative tone. There was something oddly familiar about his tall, gangly features, as well as the way he carried his narrow frame. She eyed him briefly before sliding through the small opening he allowed between the door and its frame before he was able to heave the thick wooden mass fully open. Once inside, she immediately noted how his housecoat was unusually grand for a member of the staff, even if he was in a position of authority. She found him frightfully intimidating. He was an easy 12 inches taller than she, forcing Elizabeth to tilt her head back when she smiled up at him in an attempt to soften his demeanour. Perhaps a little warmth sent his way would melt away some of his gruffness. "Kindly refrain from smiling at me in that fashion, miss. It shan't fetch the doctor any faster for you," he huffed. "Now pick your feet up and make haste." Elizabeth was not only shocked by his impudence in addressing her, but surprised by the perfect diction in which the man spoke. This was an unusual thing to find within a servant's class. She considered questioning him about his perfect diction and fine dress, but the thought passed as quickly as it came when they simultaneously looked down at the mention of her feet. A mixture of a loud cluck, a squeal of dismay, and a gasp of horror escaped his lips with such fervour as to wake the dead. "What? Where have you been? You cannot come in like that, miss. The master will be furious if I allow you to track in that. What is it?" Elizabeth's agony over the condition of her slippers renewed as she lifted one foot and then the other. They were far worse than she imagined. "I really cannot say," she replied. "It was quite dark in the alley." "The alley? You travelled through the alley?" The old man made a loud humph. "Well, whatever it is, pray remove it promptly." He clapped his hands briskly, and within seconds a slight young housemaid, who looked to be about Elizabeth's age, appeared carrying a thick rag. Elizabeth assumed she must have been standing in the shadows. How else would she know I was in need of a cleaning rag? As if reading her mind, the old man blurted out, "This is Sally. She carries that confounded rag with her wherever she goes. This is the first time it has come in so handy." "I dare say," Sally exclaimed when her eyes settled on Elizabeth's slippers. Elizabeth looked at Sally's weary expression and sighed. She thought how sad it was that the poor girl was summoned before her normal waking hour because of her dirty feet. Being a woman who valued her sleep, the knowledge that she robbed the young housemaid of precious minutes of her much-needed rest filled Elizabeth with remorse. Now the obviously overworked servant girl would probably be dragging around all day while she struggled to complete her duties. If only she had been more careful where she was stepping. Trying to ease some of her guilt, Elizabeth smiled warmly at the tired-looking wench. This resulted in the young woman blushing and looking away. The rose hue crawling up her cheeks brought out a hidden sparkle for the briefest moment before it slipped away into the abyss of her emotionless green eyes. "What are you doing?" the old man roared. "Leave the wench to her business. I shall inform the doctor you have arrived." He glowered at Sally. "I trust you shall rectify this situation post-haste." "Yes, Master John," Sally timidly replied, while she diligently scrubbed at the disgusting goo that clung stubbornly and threatening to destroy Elizabeth's expertly crafted satin slippers. As she did so, the colourful beads in the pattern of peacocks fell loose and rolled across the meticulously scrubbed slate floor. "Oh, miss, I am sorry. Your slippers are ruined for sure." Elizabeth barely realised Sally's dilemma as she pondered the manner in which the servant addressed the steward.